So yeah, just so for all of you to be aware, as you share comments or participate in this, that there is a recording happening. So I would just like to encourage us to introduce ourselves. And I would like you to say your name, where you are, and just name an event that you have attended that you have loved. That you don't describe it, just name any event at all. It doesn't have to be church related. So again, your name, where you are, and an event that you have loved. So I'm going to just go through the tiles on my screen and ask Carol to start. Your name, where you are, an event that you have loved.
I'm Carol Clark, and I'm on Presbytery staff as the Presbytery builder. And an event that I have loved would be a prayer group back in North Carolina would probably, it's the first thing that comes to mind.
Nice. Okay, Julie.
I'm Julie Price. I'm on staff as the Presbytery Connector, and I'm in Little Rock. And I used to lead a women's group for, about 15 years. And we met for 2 hours, one morning a week. And anyway, it was a wonderful gathering.
Great. Thanks. Joyce. You're on mute.
I'm Joyce Daniel, retired, having co-pastored with my husband in Kansas. I live in Fayetteville, and an event that I think of right now is a retreat, which we held in Kansas.
Nice. Thank you. Christy?
I'm Christy Metzger. I sit on session at First Presbyterian in Bentonville. And I'm the fellowship moderator, as I said. Just a family gathering on my husband's side, actually, just a big group of family.
Great. Thank you. Mike?
I'm Mike Zabo, and I'm in Searcy, Arkansas, and I'm the moderator of the Presbytery for 2023. And an event would be Choices Seminars in Dallas, Texas. And I'll let my wife introduce herself.
I'm Marcia Zabo, and I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church in Searcy. And I'd have to go with Mike. Choices was fantastic.
Great. Fern.
I'm Fern Davis. I'm the minister at Holly Grove Presbyterian Church. And this seems maybe like a strange event, but it was at the luncheon for after the funeral of my aunt, sister of my mother. And it was such a celebration of life and such a coming together of all the cousins and all of the family members. And I will always remember that.
Great. Thank you. How about Annette?
Hi, I'm Annette Hayes, and I serve on the session at MENA First Presbyterian. Membership and Evangelism Committee is what I chair, and probably a recent event that I recall that was very meaningful was pilgrimage at Fern Cliff.
Wonderful. Thanks, Annette.
My first,
I'm sorry.
Only time. No, I was just going to say it was my first and only time to attend so far. Very meaningful.
Do you want to have the gentleman standing next to you introduce himself?
He can. I've invited him to sit down, but he's.
Thank you. I'm the clerk at First Presbyterian MENA, and I'm just nosy. I'm Bill Hayes.
Great. We're glad you're here, Lindy.
Thank you.
My name is Lindy Vigato, and I'm a pastor at Second Presbyterian Church in Little Rock. And probably the most fun that I've had in a while is in October, I chaperoned my daughter's school field trip to the pumpkin patch. And there were 204-year-olds, and it was a total blast.
That's great. Thank you. Brenda? if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, the question is, when was a recent gathering that brought joy or what? Or
Yeah. So your name and where you are, and then a gathering, it doesn't have to be recent, but a gathering that you loved or that brought joy.
I'm Brenda Holder. I'm the pastor at Harmony Presbyterian, and I did have a recent gathering of my siblings. It was the first time my siblings had been together when it was not a funeral in many years, and it went very well, and we had a good time.
Great. Thank you. Susan?
My name is Susan Gray. I'm retired, but I'm also co-pastoring with Libby Lizarraga, the Mount Comfort Presbyterian Church in Fayetteville. And that's where I live. And gosh, there are so many. It's hard for me to sort out what brought the most joy. Maybe it doesn't matter. Pilgrimage as a participant, and then again as a spiritual advisor, has been very meaningful and joyful to me. And also the pastors' retreats that we used to have at Ferncliff back in the day. That's been a while, but they were also very, very important to me and joyful. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Susan. And I see the name Katie on the screen. Are you able to unmute and share, Katie?
Yeah, sorry, my my webcam is not working right now. So
That's okay. You could come across the hall and sit at my desk if you want.
I could.
No, but go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Katie Flood. I am the Director of Children and Youth Ministry at First Pres in Bentonville. And when I think about an event that was meaningful to me, I think about a conference that I went to last year. It happened to be over Zoom, but it was just really well done and put together, and it felt I felt very connected. So
great. Thanks, Katie. Well, thank you for sharing. And did I miss anybody? No? Okay. So we're perfectly tiled on my screen so that we don't have to go to a second screen. I would encourage you to, if you have a fellowship team, a fellowship committee, this is a good question to start your meeting with at some point. And maybe even focus it a little tighter. What church event have you been to? Church gathering that has brought you joy? And then unpack that with your team. Why did that bring you joy? We're not going to take the time to do that today. If we had time, we would ask you to say more. What was joyful about that event? What made it meaningful, memorable for you? Why was it special? That it's something you can do with your session or with your fellowship team to really get a little deeper into why we gather and what is meaningful about it. I had the privilege of going to an event that Priya Parker led a few years ago here in Bentonville. I had already read her book and used her principles in my doctoral thesis research, and we had our events, some of our events already here. And then I found out she was actually coming to Bentonville to speak. So I just had to go. And she started off, and this was a room full of 40 or 50 people who did not know each other. And the way she started was with a question. I don't remember now what it was. This was early 2020. And she asked this question, and then whatever it was, she said, turn to someone next to you that you don't know and didn't come with and answer the question to each other. And then after we had some time to do that, she said, okay, with your newfound friend, walk across the room or around the room and find another 2 people that have just met each other. And so we got in these groups of 4, and she asked another question, and we shared in the groups of 4, and the questions were related to each other and built one upon the other. I wish I could remember the content of the questions, but it was a really interesting way to start because we had come to hear her speak. But in order for her to speak, she wanted to sort of model what part of, one way to implement her principles. And point she was building toward was how to build community very quickly. That was part of the theme of her talk. And we really did build community very quickly with the way she led that group. So I was really thankful to be able to go to that. So Bria Parker is trained in group dialogue and conflict resolution, and she's done some pretty high profile events around the world where she has brought enemies together and helped forge treaties and things like that. So she's done some pretty important stuff in that way, big picture. But she spends a lot of time now working on shaping group dynamics and collective conversation. And that's really what this book was about. So I want to invite anybody who's on this call, just in 2 or 3 sentences, to share something that you learned from this book. And let's keep this positive rather than critiquing the book. I know there's critique as well, but 2 or 3 sentences of something that got your attention or that you enjoyed about the book. And you don't have to share if you just, if you want to wave at me and I'll call on you. Yes, Mike.
I particularly liked at the end where the moderator or whoever was conducting the meeting brought people together and summarized what had happened and attempted to convey some things to do when you get back, how you could use this meeting not only to benefit yourself, but other people that you come in contact with.
So a solid ending.
Yes.
And I know you're not showing off by saying that you got all the way through the book by starting at the end, but yeah, having a solid ending. You know, we've all been to events where people kind of don't know when to leave or don't have that final, you know, in worship, we have a benediction and a blessing and a charge, but in a lot of gatherings, we don't quite know, you know, when they're ending. But that's a great chapter. And thank you, Mike. Anybody else want to share something that was helpful in a couple of sentences? Annette.
I'll kind of build on that because I like that too. I thought it was interesting that she had broken it down into all those parts, meeting or communicating as a group, and how important each one of them was. And back to the ending, it kind of reminded me the way she laid that out of when I'm with my grandkids or with a group of children, and you let them know ahead of time, you warn them ahead of time, you know, you don't just promptly end something. It's in stages. You know, you have a process for getting everybody kind of notified ahead of time what the situation is going to be. And I also like that she didn't want to begin and end with logistics, you know, with directions, and that's my tendency to want to do that. So that was good.
Well, that is all of our tendencies as Presbyterians. You know, we're so organized and we need to know where the bathrooms are. But I do love that. Don't begin a funeral with logistics. That chapter is really, really good. And then that ending thing, and in the event I'm going to describe in a little bit here, what we've done with this in Bentonville, we give a 10-minute warning, you know, that last call, 10 minutes, and then you must go get your children out of the nursery. But we give them that time frame. Yeah. Carol, you were ready to talk.
Yeah, well, there are so many, but one of them that I chewed on a lot was the who do you exclude piece of it with the closed door. And so that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and the don't be a chill host, I thought was very, very interesting. So I could just list all the titles of the chapters because I thought it was so valuable, but those are probably the 2 that made me really, really think a lot. And I'm not sure where I am on them, but it really made me think a lot.
Well, so the chill host part, I think really what that don't be a chill host, what that really comes down to is intentionality, not to waste people's time. You know, if you are planning and organizing an event, every minute matters for people. And yeah, you want time for hanging out and just casual conversation, but the don't be a chill host means own it. and people will appreciate the guidance and the direction that you give. And I'll say more about the boundaries, the limit, the gracious limitation of who's invited in a moment. Joyce?
I was just thinking in that line of what you just said, that it's hard for me to hurt someone's feelings. And so when it comes to exclusivity, it was really helpful to see how you're thinking of everyone and not just the person who wants to push the boundaries or change them. So
Yeah.
that was really helpful to me.
Yeah. So does anybody else want to share before I move on a little bit into our event? I just want to follow what Joyce just said about the boundaries and the exclusion, because the event I'm going to highlight here, and we have had a few of these, we started off with an exclusion. So the age group that was invited to these events was 25 to 50-year-olds. And our church has a very strong history of intergenerational events. And we did research with our younger adults, and I'll say more about that in a little bit, and concluded that what they needed was some time with each other where they could do some peer support. And so we started the events of 25 to 50 years old, and we got pushback on that. Why are the people over 50 being excluded? But boy, Priya Parker says, stick to your convictions. It's gracious exclusion. And I'll give you an example of how that played out at our first event. And this is a reservation type of event. But at our first event, the day of, one of the registry guests called me and said, my husband had to suddenly go out of town, so he can't come tonight. But hey, my mother is visiting and she could take his place. And so we had a real dilemma, right? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure your mom's probably over 50. I don't want to presume, but I'm guessing. And she said, no, yes, she is definitely over 50. And she said, but she's a good conversationalist. Now, I know this is being recorded. I'm going to be as gracious as I can about this. But we did, because it was part of my thesis research, we did interviews with people who had participated in the event. And someone said, our table was great. And this person's mom was a great conversationalist, but it changed the dynamic because we were not doing peer support at that table. So, we wanted to be gracious to this person who wanted her mother to come. We had a real, dilemma over that. But I would say, I learned from that it did change things. And I don't know that I would go back and tell her mother, no, she couldn't come, but be really aware that when you set the parameters of who's involved, you have a purpose for that, as much as you can, to really stick to that. So I want to go into specifics of how we implemented Priya Parker's principles in these events that we've had a few of now. I also will say, after we did the first few events, we had 3 of them, and then I went to her talk in late February of 2020. Then all this learning and all this excitement about gathering just got shut down for a long time. But thankfully, we have been able this past year to restart those events. So I'm going to try to do screen sharing at this point, and I hope that I'm able to successfully do this. Can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So some of you have read the book, some of you have not, but the basic principles of her book are to gather with a purpose, and to shape your planning around that purpose. She's trying to get us to not do things out of habit. Now, tradition is good, and she's clear about that, but re-examine it and figure out what your purpose is. She says the goal is to be transformative, and that can be small, transformative. Your Thanksgiving potluck may have transformed people's hearts because they're feeling more grateful. It can be that simple. but something about the event to be transformative. And she says for the people and for the community. The people who participate, and then we had that leaving piece. What are you taking from this to be able to make a difference in your life or your family or the community? But she says, and this kind of hurts to hear, let's listen carefully. She says, gatherings are often uninspiring, underwhelming, fail to capture, change, or connect us. It gets a little more painful here. She also says, much of our gathering disappoints us, but we keep tending to do it in the same ways on autopilot. And she says, when the need begins to shift and the format is solving for an outdated purpose, we can hold on to the forms of our gatherings to the detriment of our needs. Well, that was happening here. And when we saw that our young adults, 25 to 50, were joining the church and coming to worship on Sunday mornings but then not engaging in the broader life of the church, not saying yes to being asked to be a deacon or an elder, not coming to church events outside of Sunday mornings, we had a question that needed to be answered. What is happening? We did research on various aspects of that, but that last statement, when the need begins to shift and the format is solving for an outdated purpose, we can hold on to the forms of our gatherings to the detriment of our needs. So we were continuing to have potluck dinners, for which we were not providing childcare. And we weren't asking young adults what night of the week was best for them. We had always done Wednesday night, once a month, potluck dinner. A lot of us love that. I grew up that way. It feeds a need for sure. But our young families never showed up at those events. And we were asking, and they were saying, by the time we get done with work and get the kids from school, we don't have time to make a dish. People are going to want to exchange recipes or ooh and ah over each other's dishes. We don't do that. Or we need a break from our kids in order to engage with other adults, but there's no childcare. So they come and they chase their kids all around the gym while they're trying to have fellowship with other adults. And by the way, Wednesday night is not a good night for them. So, but we were sticking to this tradition. Now we have continued to have some Wednesday night potlucks. They're just basic potlucks, but this outdated purpose, it didn't help our young adults with their gatherings. And that was something we found out by sitting down and asking them, what do you need? What do you hope for? What feeds your soul? Because the question had been, why don't they come to the things that we plan? And I think we all can ask ourselves, well, maybe we just need to go to them and say, what do you need? Rather than why aren't you coming to the things we plan? Oops, sorry about that. So she says, commit to a bold, sharp purpose. And that might sound kind of cumbersome, but if you take the time to do that, to figure out what your purpose is, then you shape what your gathering is around that purpose. We worked pretty hard to come up with our bold, sharp purpose for the events I'll describe. And this is what we came up with: to provide a unique space and conversation structure in which adult members 25 to 50 years old are encouraged to pause in their busy and stressful lives in order to gather, ponder deep questions, and talk with each other over a meal about matters of importance in their lives and faith journeys. Okay, that's a mouthful. There's a lot in that. What we found out from our young adults in our pre-event research is that they had a really hard time committing to something that was sequential. You come to part one, and then next month you'll come to part two, next week to something, or a Bible study that has chapters that are progressing. They had a really hard time committing to that. They preferred to try one-offs, where I can come to this event. It doesn't matter whether I came to an event before it or whether I'm committing to a year's worth of regular events. They wanted to be able to come, get a lot out of it, and be able to take something home with them. Not able to really commit to preparing for that event. And they needed to be able to dive deep quickly. By that, they meant we don't want to come and just stand around waiting for the event to get meaningful. Dive in quickly. We don't have time for oohing and awing over the centerpieces or those kinds of things we sometimes do in our gatherings. So we came up with this title. She does say that the title matters. It says something about the event. And so we came up with Conversations That Matter. And I already talked about her theory of the kindness of exclusion. So this is, you're going to see these are our young adults in our church. This is one of our events. You'll notice if you look carefully at the background, it looks like we're not at church. Well, guess what? We were not at church. We do these events off-site. This is in a member's home. This is not a member in the 25 to 50-year-old age range. This is an over 50 member who said, use my house. I've got lots of space. These tables, our custodians took the tables from church, took the chairs from church. We pushed all their furniture aside. And we set up the tables ahead of time. We took the glasses, the plates, everything from church and got it all set up in a member's home. Now, Priya Parker has some things to say about table geometry. Whenever possible, we use round tables. They really facilitate conversation. You know, if you're at a rectangular table, especially if it's a long one, she talks about people whose heads ping pong back and forth to the people on each side of them. Round tables are great for this. She always also says in this kind of context, 6 to 8 people is the ideal for the kind of conversations we're talking about. So we set those tables intentionally in that way. You can see everybody's wearing name tags here. And in Parker's book, she talks about first name being large and last name being small. So we did that, but everybody had name tags that they got when they arrived. Part of our hospitality for these events was you had to register ahead of time. You could not just show up. And that was so that we could prepare the name tags. We also did seating assignments. You might have noticed in Priya Parker's book, she talks about the German tradition of separating couples by putting them at different tables. But in our but for the sake of hospitality, in the registration form, there was a question that said, are you comfortable being seated not with the person you came with? And so if someone said, no, I'm not comfortable with that, then we did put them together. But a lot of people said, oh, please seat me at a different table. So we did assign seating, and the way that works, and we've done this for 5 events now, I would take all the name cards that our secretary made ahead of time, and I would go to the event after the tables were all set up, and I would stand there by myself that afternoon, and I would pray over each name, and I would try to put introverts with extroverts and make sure that, this person is, if the spouses wanted to be separated, I didn't just put them back to back, I put them at a table further away, but trying to balance group dynamics. We also had a table leader at each table that was subtle, but had a handout ahead of time about what dynamics of leading good group conversation. So in the registration, we asked about allergy or dietary restrictions. We asked if they needed childcare, and we asked if it was okay for them to be seated apart from the person they came with. So they're already getting a little bit of an idea of what to expect just by the invitation and the response that they filled out. So we provided childcare at church. They drop off their kids. We had a nursery for the little kids. We had our youth director doing events for the older kids. And so they drop their kids off at church and come to the event. And it was pretty scripted, and I'll say more about that. But in the invitation, this is what she says, the invitation signals what to expect. And this was the statement in the invitation. Conversations That Matter is a way of exploring meaningful questions in a casual way over a meal together. We will be reflecting on topics relevant to our daily lives and our journeys of faith as we navigate early and mid adulthood. Bring yourself and an open heart. So this invitation conveys a little bit of mystery. We're not going to tell you too much ahead of time what to expect. What do you need to bring? That's always important in an invitation. An open heart and yourself. So this was stated enough to give them an idea of what was coming. It's not for everybody, but this would help them decide whether or not to commit to it. So think about this kind of invitation as opposed to what often goes out from our fellowship committees, which is come and get to know your church family. Well, that's fine, but it's really broad and it's not different. It's not eye-catching. Come and get to know your church family is really important, but it's not unique. And it doesn't give people much of an idea of what to expect. So here's another picture from another event. This was at another member's home. Again, a member who's over 50 who has always supported these events. In fact, she provides flowers for the table. She's so excited about these events, but she wanted to have one at her home. Again, we brought in the church tables, church chairs, although this particular person really wanted to use her own fine china and not have us bring the church's dishes to her home. So that was kind of a fun twist on this. But again, you see the name tags. Everyone has name tags. And you might be able to see on the table, there are place cards. Everybody's card is here. We are very fortunate that we have people in our church who love to cook and love to provide food for these kinds of events. So even though the events are catered, they're catered by church members at no cost. So we just pay for the food. Another really important thing is the meal is plated. And I had to learn that term plated a few years ago. There's no buffet. The servers from the kitchen, who are all people over 50 in our congregation, they bring the dishes out to the tables one course at a time so that the people gathered around the tables can really focus on the conversation. If you have a buffet table, that might not seem like an interruption, but it can be an interruption to conversation. Okay, everybody, you can get up now and go get your salad. The salads are ready. That takes time. And so we had it all plated. The only thing people needed to get up for was to use the restroom. And that way they could really focus on the conversation at the table. Now, just before we go any further, I want to just offer a few caveats. These kinds of events, new events that Priya Parker describes, they don't need to replace traditional events. So I know people get a little nervous about this. Someone at our church, and again, we're being recorded, so I'll be nice, but said a few months ago, this is not how we do church. I did not grow up doing church this way. I don't understand this. Okay, that's fine. It's important that we need to hear that. But I also want to say this doesn't have to replace other events that we're used to doing and that we like doing. You don't have to scrap all your traditional fellowship stuff in order to do something new or do a traditional event with a new purpose. There's a lot to learn in Parker's book without feeling that you're throwing everything out and starting over. I also want to say this is very contextual. You know, our events don't transfer one to one to another church, but I hope you're getting some ideas about how you might do things differently. I also will say our events are highly scripted. The table leaders have a script. The questions follow a progression, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the time is very tightly controlled, and they go from 6:30 to 8:30. At 8:20, someone comes through the room and says, in 10 minutes, we're done. In 10 minutes, you must go back to the church and get your children. Part of that is a courtesy to the nursery workers, but also it's that Parker's principle of having a solid ending. People know when it's over. So she talks about taking a stand on these things. And when you take a stand as a host, your participants feel more respected, and their time is really, really valuable and well used. Okay, so here's another event. This is not at a home. This is if you've been to Bentonville, we have a wonderful place called the Museum of Native American History. And they have a room that you can rent for events. And they give churches a big discount, and we've had a couple of events there. And I want you to look at this closely, at these cards that are on the table, because this picture shows a little bit more how we structure this. These are tent cards that have questions on them. And the questions are tied to the courses of the dinner. So there's a salad question, and everyone around the table has a chance to answer, discuss, ask each other questions, follow up. And then as we're monitoring the room and the table leaders give us a little high sign that they're ready for the next question, they lift the card, and that's a signal for the kitchen people to bring out the main course. Or we go through appetizer, salad, main course, dessert. And with each of those, there's a new question. And again, the people around the table are focused on talking with each other. They're not trying to go refill their plate or getting distracted by children running up to them. They're really able to do a deep dive on these questions. We do have them do short introductions around the table before getting started with the questions. And, you know, I asked you all to reflect on an event that brought you joy. Their question when we had this at the Native American Museum, just because of being contextual, give your name and something about how you're connected to Native American life or history. I mean, it could be you love the color turquoise, or you've slept in a teepee, or you have Native American heritage in your family background, but something connected to the venue that we were actually in as they did those introductions. And as I said, the table leaders had instructions ahead of time. They agreed to be table leaders. The instructions just basically described group dynamics. Other than the introductions, we did not ask them to go around the table for each question. That becomes pretty stiff after a while. So they did the introductions, but then it was, who wants to answer this question? And you can do follow-up with each other. Tell me more about that. Or, oh, I experienced that too. But you don't put people on the spot, because the questions they progress, getting more personal as they go along. And so the table leader's job is to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak, no one dominates, and to just keep the conversation flowing. So this idea of these questions, there's it's in the book where Parker notes a group that used what she called a conversation menu. And that really caught my attention. In theirs, it was 6 courses, but we usually did 4. The conversation menu. Here's another. This one was in someone's home, and for one of the tables, because of the space, we had to use a rectangular table, but it was not too long in its rectangularness. But you see the questions on the table here and the name tags and people engaging. And you know, these are people who've maybe seen each other across the way in worship. But when you come out of worship, especially if you have little children, getting a cup of coffee and a cookie in the Welcome Center is not the greatest way to get to know people. But here they are saying, oh, I've seen your face in worship, and they're having these conversations. Here are the question cards. This one was from our first event. Where and how do you find spiritual nourishment? And as they answered that question, going around the table, then again, the table leader would lift that question to the one that's underneath it, and it gets a little deeper and a little deeper with each question, with each course. Here's one from another event. This was the appetizer question. It says down here in the corner, when have you recently felt a sense of relief or peace about something? Found an answer, a solution, came to a place of acceptance, received good news. We try to start the first question being a very positive question that's kind of reflecting on something that happened to them. And then the second question would be more in the moment. And then the last question is more forward looking. But this was the appetizer question at one of our events. We also often put scripture passages on the cards, scripture passages that relate to the question, but that's just if the table has time to talk about them. So here is one example of how it progressed. On the appetizer beverage table, this was more of a mingling time. They weren't at their tables yet, was just a scripture passage. The theme was tranquility. And so the scripture was, "O Lord, you have given drink to gladden the human heart, oil to make the face shine, and bread to strengthen the human heart." So, by the way, on the appetizer table, we do put out beer and wine. But when people go to their tables to start the conversations, we take the alcohol back to the kitchen. So we don't keep serving alcohol throughout the meal, but at the appetizer table, that's an option. Question 1 on this: describe a particular place or circumstance that has given you tranquility, however briefly, and what is that feeling like? So again, looking back, and it's a positive question. They took their appetizers with them to the table for that question. Then when the salads came out, the next question: how did someone else encourage or uplift you recently? After they've processed that and the main course is ready to come out, do you struggle with negativity within yourself, from others, in the world? This is the question that the main course question is always the hardest question, the deepest question, and gets the most time. We have a time schedule. The kitchen people know, okay, this course, the appetizer is going to be about 10 minutes, but the main course is probably going to be like 20 minutes. But we kind of monitor that. And then the dessert question. Studies show that even small moments of tranquility and snippets of encouragement actually stimulate the release of oxytocin in our brains, which elevates our energy and shapes our outlook. In the season ahead, how can you surface opportunities for tranquility in your life, or how can you offer encouragement to others? There's a lot in that question, but people can take it in whatever direction they want to. And then we put under their plate on a little card, we put a take-home question. And that's again part of Priya Parker's, end well and give them something to take with them. This take-home question was, what does it mean to trust the Lord to lift us up when we are weary or exhausted? What are some specific ways that we can find strength or refreshment? So that's from one. The questions are different at each event, but that was a recent one, the one that was at the Native American Museum. We thought tranquility was a good theme to go. And by the way, at the Native American Museum, they play very gentle flute music in the background. So it really helps with that theme of tranquility. This was our kitchen staff for the over 50 people. And our caterer here, a member of our church, all of these are members of our church. But they are the ones who brought the plates out to the tables, cleared the plates, did all the cleanup and everything. And then they all said, can we turn the tables? Can we do a Conversations That Matter dinner where the 25 to 50-year-olds serve us? And we answered these questions. So our next event was at the Native American Museum. Again, same questions. We had many people who'd attended the first one volunteer to serve in the kitchen. So we had the 25 to 50-year-olds in the kitchen and the over 50 at the tables. And it worked beautifully to just turn the tables, but use basically the same questions on that. So Priya Parker talks about awing your guests, A-W-I-N-G, awing your guests and honoring them. We wanted to have our 25 to 50-year-olds really feel cared for by the church. We wanted them to feel listened to and cared for. So we made the space as beautiful as possible. We made it as easy for them to attend as possible. All they had to do was register ahead of time. They didn't have to read a book. They didn't have to do a Bible study. They didn't have to find their own childcare or prepare a dish. You come, your church is taking care of you, and you dive deep into your spirituality with your peers. And that's Parker's value of honoring your guests. So I want to just talk a little bit about some results, and then we'll get out of this PowerPoint here. So we had some unexpected outcomes. One was that participants' children formed stronger bonds with each other for having attended the childcare aspect of the event. The children who maybe hadn't been part of children's ministry in the church or just had been in very structured context came and maybe watched a movie together, had dinner together. The children formed stronger bonds with each other. That was not our goal, but that happened. Participants made intergenerational connections with the older people who catered, hosted, and helped with the events, because we would pull out the kitchen staff and introduce them, and they would get to know them just even as they're bringing plated food to their tables. Participants have seen this as a way to invite unchurched friends to a church event because it's not in the church. And older people have taken greater notice of the presence and the needs of mid-adults in our congregation. We're not taking them for granted. We're not assuming, again, that they should come to the things that we plan. I say we because I'm 60, so I'm in that older group. So I like the traditional events, but I love this kind of event as well. The participants have later accepted nominations to become elders and deacons in the church. The average age of our session and our board of deacons has dropped significantly since we started these events. Previously, they were saying, no, I'm too busy. But by getting connected with each other and feeling honored by the church, they have begun to say yes to the nominating committee, and that is really exciting. So I want to say it's just worth noting that these were two post-event comments from two different people. One was, I feel more connected to the church family than maybe ever. Another person said this would be a great way to introduce our unchurched friends to church. And in fact, at the next event, they did invite and their friends did come. And so that's been successful. And it's remarkable to me to receive these comments regarding an event about church, right? We're doing church, about an event that did not take place at the church. And this is really key, no pastors were present or leading the events. So for someone to say, I felt so connected to my church family at something that wasn't at church and didn't include a pastor. I mean, I'm there, but I'm kind of like way off in the kitchen in the corner, just, making sure it all works, but I'm not interacting with the guests in that way. We did do one event during COVID on Zoom that we tried to do in a similar fashion to this, and it did not work. This is not a Zoom kind of event. We have done two now since COVID has ended. And I also want to note that we did get a Future of the Church grant last spring that has helped us offset the cost of food and rental space. And we still have money in that fund to carry us into 2023. So thank you, Future of the Church Committee, for that grant. Let's see, is there anything else? Oh, yeah, okay, I think I'm just going to stop sharing. And so what I want to do at this point is just open it up to comments or questions. We have plenty of time. We're scheduled to go to 11:30. We may not go that long. We just wanted to have that good buffer, but questions or comments?
Just practical here. When everyone arrived in the home, you say you weren't, well, first, let me back it up. Were there more than one home hosting an event on the same night?
No, because we do the registrations far enough ahead of time that we can figure out how many people we can fit in a home. And It's really just turned out for every event, we've done five, I think now, the registration has been between 25 and 30 for each event, not always the same people, but we can do that if you put 6 or 7 people around a round table, not everybody's home can accommodate several tables like that. Meeting at the Native American Museum, we could have done up to 100 people in that space. So that gave us a lot more flexibility. And so we would confirm the venue after the registrations had come in so that we knew how much space we needed. And if you've been to Bentonville, we also one time rented Compton Gardens, which is a lovely space that has an outdoor deck where we did the appetizers. and then plenty of space inside for up to six or so tables. And again, places give us, a rental discount being a church.
Okay. And you said you didn't lead anything in this. So when everybody came in, who welcomed them? How did they know, oh, I'm going out here for appetizers? It's time to sit down now.
That's a great question. The first few events I could not lead because I was doing research for my doctoral thesis. And, there's a bias when the researcher is part of the event. So for those events, I stayed at church and played with the kids and teenagers. But I would, from the people who registered, I would kind of look at who had registered and invite one of them to be the welcoming person and give them instructions on how to welcome and lead. And so I've continued to do that, although I have attended the last couple of events, not as a participant at the table, but in the kitchen. But from the participants, you know what? You get much more success if the people lead their own stuff. And so the people who register to come, I would get back in touch with them and say, hey, would you be the one to welcome, to say the opening blessing, to give the instructions? Yes, Mike. You're on mute. Can you unmute yourself, Mike? There you go.
Okay. All right. So your example was a wonderful example of who to exclude. I used to run sales meetings, and if I had the owner of the company in the room, I never got straight answers. I always got the politically correct answers. So people are always going to look to who they perceive to be the leader, and then they're always going to give whatever they think is the correct response. So if you were involved, well, you'd get something about the church or something like that, but you probably wouldn't, the people wouldn't open up and give their real feelings if they thought there was someone there who might make a judgment of what they're saying. So who to exclude is really, really important.
Yes. Yeah. And it might not be an age thing. It might be, a topic that is, there's a topic that really has to, like, how do we, how do we struggle in the workplace with our faith? You're going to want to have people who are in the workplace to come to that. And retired people may want, the joy of the fellowship of that event, but they're going to change the conversation because they're not currently struggling in the workplace. I just made that up, but there'd be all kinds of ways that you would look at who needs to be here, and who can we graciously exclude. I think in Bentonville, we've gotten over that. I mean, we've done enough of these events, and particularly when we did the flip, people loved that. I will say one person coming out of that event where the younger served the older, one person came out of that event saying, I don't like these age restrictions. I think we should always all be together. And I said, thank you for your feedback.
Oh, one other question. What did you have any spouses that fell into the two different age groups, a 40 and 52? And if so, how did you handle that?
Yeah, so we have several couples in that category where someone's under 50 and someone's over 50. And we've made it very clear that they are welcome at either of those, either the under 51 or the over 51. So there is one couple that has been to every single event that we've offered, even though one of them is under 50 and one's over 50, but they don't want to sit together at the table. And so they separate, and they are our most enthusiastic supporters. I'm not sure what will happen when that younger person turns 50. I hope they'll continue to come when we offer the over 50 events. But yeah, people had asked me that when we first set up the first event. And so we made it very clear that they were both welcome. And, our couples who are, late 40s and early 50s, they're raising children, and most of them, and they have a lot in common with the other under 50 group. But then they fairly easily transitioned into that over 50 group too. Great question. Other questions?
How many different people, do you think, attended the, 25 to 50 group? And did some of them do more than one?
So we've only had one so far that was over 50. That was in November.
I meant the 25 to 50.
How many came to each event?
How many different people were involved in one of
Oh,
your?
like if I added up all the events together,
Uh-huh,
how many different
ish.
people? Yeah, so there were some repeat people. I would say if I added those 4 events together, probably around 50 people.
Okay, good.
Yeah. With 25 at each event, but then there have been some people have come once, some people have come a couple of times. There's that one couple and a few others who've come to every event. We do it, you know, 2 to 4 times a year because it takes a lot of planning for one thing, a lot of planning.
Yeah, that's
But
it.
also it's supposed to be special.
Mhm.
And if you do things really often, for like a monthly prayer group or Bible study, that has a different purpose. But for this kind of purpose of feeling the specialness of it, we don't want to wear that out.
Mhm.
And so we have this, between now and June, we'll have two more events. We had 2 in the fall. The one in September was for the under 50. The one in November was for the over 50. And we'll do that again between now and June.
I
And
was
then
sitting here, sorry, I was sitting here thinking of a church that's also written a grant and they want to do an event for single mothers in their community. And this is a one, as you've described this is just a beautiful guide. I'll make sure that I at least encourage them to listen to this because it looks like just a wonderful event. And it was very helpful to me to get to hear you talk about that so that I can start applying some of the things that I was really kind of struggling a little bit with in the book. Really valuable to me.
And that cohort would be great for this type of structure. The main thing for them would be the childcare.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we asked our young adults, 25 to 50, when they would like these events to happen, we were so surprised that they all said Friday night. And that's what we ended up doing. They said, you know, we get to the end of the week, we're exhausted, we don't feel like cooking dinner. We're looking at a weekend, you know, that's jam-packed, and most of them have kids young enough that they aren't in band or Friday night football or something like that. Or their kids can take care of themselves in that sense. But they asked for Friday night because to them, especially for our couples, that was date night. I mean, that was a way to go out, not prepare food, but not pay for a meal, which is often a, you know, inhibiting factor for young adults. And childcare was provided. I mean, you know, if you have kids, you might remember you get to Friday and you haven't found a babysitter yet, and you're wondering how much dinner is going to cost, and you're tired. I mean, this was hospitality for that age group, but they chose Friday night, which completely blew me away. I didn't ever think of planning a church event on a Friday night, but we have done all of them on Friday nights, and it's worked out great. The other thing that the over 50 people can do besides serve in the kitchen is help out at church with the kids. And we've had people in the older group do that, volunteer in the nursery or with the youth group. And that's been another way to get them connected and involved.
Georgia?
Yes.
Again, more of on the lines of a pragmatic question. So, and if this was discussed and I missed it, I can go back and listen and not take time. But so for that very first time, backing it even further up, when you were working with the fellowship team, what kind of training or teaching or prepping in terms of helping the team that was going to do this for the first time receive to ensure the success of the event?
Right. So part of that initially was giving that team feedback from I'll call it, for lack of a better word, interviews that we had done with 25 to 50-year-olds. Now, again, I was in a structured format because I was doing research for my thesis, but I actually made appointments with people in this cohort and went to their home because I didn't want them to have to get childcare just to talk to me. I would go and sit in their homes with a notepad. And this is the question I started with: what feeds your soul? And then I would just let them talk and I would write. And honestly, people would start to cry and say, I think about it all the time and no one's ever asked me that question. So, in church, we work on a lot of assumptions. And when this is going way back now, 5 or 6 years before we started these events and this research, we were looking at the question of why are these people joining our church, coming to worship, but not doing anything else in the church? And there was someone who said, and I think others echo this, well, young people are selfish and they give 1 hour to God and that's all they have time for.
Oh, gosh.
And that person said it out loud, but I think sometimes people over 50 think that way. Why won't they do this? Why won't they do the things that we did when we were that age? Why won't they commit in ways that, they just don't want to commit? Those were not satisfying answers to me, not satisfying responses, and it didn't help us grow the church or feed those people's needs. And, if you've gone through your Doctor of Ministry program, they say, what's missing? You have to ask in your context, what is missing? What is not working? And dig deeper and ask those questions. And so I set up appointments with the young adults in our congregation, and I would sit in their home and ask them that question. Very open. I had no idea where it was going to go. What feeds your soul? And as they started tearfully saying how important their souls are to them and how important their faith in God is to them, but they don't know how to engage in older traditional style church events, then we started to get somewhere. So part of it was for to just share with the committee what we found out in those interviews. I didn't conduct all of them, but we gathered that data as a preliminary thing and just shared that. These people are hungry for their faith to be developed. And we've got the interviews to prove it, but they have limitations. Their lives are incredibly stressful and incredibly busy. So I asked my kids, who are now in their late 20s, early 30s, but as part of this, my kids aren't here in Bentonville, but I just said, what's church engagement look like to you? And my daughter, who had a 1-year-old at the time, she said, Mom, honestly, by the time I get off work on Wednesday and go get Abby from preschool and get home, yes, I want to serve my church and get to know my church and be in fellowship. But the last thing I want to do in that moment is stop by the store and get a potato salad and try to make it look like I made the potato salad and go over to church where I'm just going to be feeding this kid in the high chair and trying to pay attention to other people. That really helped me to see many, many more people 25 to 50 are working than were when I was that age. And there is just a different dynamic. People's lives are different now. And people, society used to set aside Wednesday for church night. That's long gone. So, things that people are involved in are happening on Wednesday nights that aren't church. Fern, does that help? Just giving that initial snapshot of why we're doing it. I mean, really get deep into why we're doing it. Helps prepare the team to think differently. And then with those volunteers for the table leaders, again, after everybody's registered, I would look at who it was. Oh, I know that person. He can be a table leader. And I would invite them. And I can share this with you, but this is the page that the table leaders get a few days ahead of time for them to go through some pointers on group dynamics and the purpose of the gathering so that they're really ready to lead there. And they don't lead it in a authoritative teacher kind of way, but just it's subtle, but they're prepared. And we do let them introduce themselves as the table leader so that the group does know that they are prepped ahead of time. And then, to that comment of that I, was told, well, I never did church like this. This is not how we do church. I don't get it. The next time we got together, I invited someone who'd been to one of these events to give feedback. And I think that pretty much answered that concern.
Did you say that paper is something you can share or you cannot share?
Yes, I can send this to you. It's the table. Now, there'll be things that just ignore, like we're starting at 6:30 and we're giving our last call at 8:20. And I mean, there's some
It can be
specifics
adjusted.
on there, but it gives
can
you
be
the general.
adjusted accordingly. Mhm.
Yeah. If y'all will, let's see, if Carol, can I get email addresses
Yeah.
for people on the screen?
Well, Julie,
If you send it to me, Georgia,
Okay.
we can, I'll figure out, I'll post it with this recording. We'll do something so it's a page and they can get both of these.
Excellent.
I also wonder about your slide presentation. There was so much information on that. If that's something you might want to share too.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. It's a modified version of, so this was my doctoral thesis, right? And I had to do a PowerPoint for my thesis committee and then, go through the whole examination over it. So this is kind of an adaptation out of that, but we've done events since then that I've added in, and worked on it and modified on it. I would not encourage you to read my whole thesis because it's full of nerdy little footnotes and all that stuff, but it is on file at McCormick Seminary. It did win the Hunt Prize for doctoral thesis for McCormick. And so it is available. I think I can say with confidence that the research is solid. So that's available too, but and some pastors in our presbytery have asked for my thesis and I have shared that, and it goes into way more detail than you need or want. But I'd be happy to share that PowerPoint as well. Joyce.
Georgia, I have a curiosity question. What drew you to this topic as your dissertation?
Yeah, so, starting my doctoral, my doctorate of ministry degree is in pastoral care. And that's, I'm a chaplain, have been a hospital chaplain for many years. And pastoral care is kind of the area I'm drawn to. But in that process, at least the way McCormick does it with a doctoral doctor of ministry, you're supposed to ask that question, what don't I understand about my context, about my congregation? What is missing? What makes me curious? Or it could be about your community or your congregation, and to keep asking those questions. And I thought I was going to, solve racism and bring peace to the world and, all those big ticket, sexy items. And what kept coming back to haunt me was this question. We have these people. Really what tipped it for me was I got a phone call one day from a person in our congregation in this age group who'd had a family crisis. And in talking this through with me over the phone, I found out the family crisis had happened a few days earlier. And they were working on, even the phrase was used, we were Googling scripture passages to help us through this. And I dropped everything, went to their home, and I don't want to go into that because this is being recorded, but what really troubled me after that was, why did it take 3 days before you called the church? And why were you turning to Google before you were turning to your family of faith? That drove it for me. That was a turning point for me to where I thought, we are not asking these people in this age group what feeds their soul. We are missing something. So that's, Joyce, that was the tipping point for me. Was we need to quit just planning our own stuff and wondering why they're not coming. And they need to feel the care and love and embrace of the church. I had to clarify all through my research with the seminary and, with people who were curious about what we were doing. I was not asking the question, how can we get young families to come to our church? That was not my question. And it never has been in this context, although we had that side benefit of it inviting new people, because the people who participated in it were inviting their friends.
Hmm.
But that wasn't the goal. And there are a million doctoral theses out there about how to attract young people to
Yeah,
the church.
yeah.
And we didn't need one more of those.
Yeah.
But this was, where are they after 11:30 on Sunday morning? And
Thank
why?
you. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
I don't want to take any time away from everybody talking with you, Georgia, but how would you apply this to a presbytery meeting? I mean,
Where are the
that's
bathrooms? Let's start with logistics.
Uh,
You know, I think we're very fixated on logistics at presbytery meetings, and that can become pretty cumbersome at the initial gathering, the opening gavel of presbytery. You know, where are the bathrooms? What time is lunch?
Mhm.
That can all be handled in a handout, or as Maria
Screen.
Parker says, you know, put it on the screen, or give that information in about a half an hour. People can sit for half an hour without going to the
Mhm.
bathroom while you do the joyful,
Yeah.
you know, opening song, opening prayer. We're so glad to be together. Stand up and turn to the person next to you. And, you know, we can pass the peace and do all those wonderful things. And then, but yeah, to her point about don't open a funeral with logistics, I think it can apply to presbytery meetings. So that's one thing I would think. I think we do a good job of getting in small groups to have deeper conversations. I think that's really helpful at presbytery meetings. We don't want to become gimmicky. And I think you can read her book in a certain way and think my gatherings have to have a gimmick. They have to have a catch. They have to have a door prize or something like that. That's not what she's saying. She's saying you want to plan an event so that people leave having been really glad that they were there. And that can take all kinds of different forms. You know, when we get really gimmicky, we start giving people lots of stuff. Like, oh, you get to take home a goodie bag, and here's your pen that has the theme printed on it. And, you know, we get into the physical stuff. People don't need more stuff. They don't need to go home with a bag full of plastic and things with emblems and slogans on them. So I would just steer us away from that. But why are we gathering, and how can we plan this event that really fulfills that purpose? But I would say start big, you know, leave the logistics to another format or further into the meeting. They're important. People do need to know where the path is. I really, really do need to know that. But she has a lot of good advice that could really even apply to presbytery meetings. Yeah, Mike.
So it seems like a real key question that we're all kind of waltzing around is the key question being, how does attending this event add to rather than subtract from my life? So in the case, I mean, so many of our events at the church, you know, they're social events. Yeah, they're nice. They don't really add to the life much, you know, because there's no real purpose being accomplished. And with the young people, and even with older people sometimes, I mean, you know, you come to church, you sit there for an hour, whatever, and then you go away, and you don't feel like this has just added to my life, that I've got some tools that I can take home, that I can apply to my life. So, you know, how does this add to somebody's life rather than just subtract an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours from their day? And then the other thing, you know, is who benefits from this. And so the people have to benefit more than the church, if that makes sense, if you're trying to invite young people to join a church or something.
That's exactly right. We set these events up so that the people who attended them would benefit more than the church would benefit from it. It's gone full circle, and it's just both. But initially it was, how can we care for these people? But I would say, so Mike, you know, think of a typical church potluck dinner. What if you had under each plate a take-home question that you didn't necessarily tell people about, but I mean, they'll find them because if they're going to a buffet, they're going to pick up their plate. But what if under their placemat, you had a take-home question? What if at a typical church potluck, this is something we've never done at our church. Christy, take note. What if at your potluck, once everybody's at their tables, what if you say, we want you to go around your table and introduce yourselves to each other and answer this question. And you put the question up on the whiteboard. We have never at a potluck, this church, when I came here, we were doing monthly potlucks that we loved, but we never were told to introduce ourselves to each other around our tables. That was never an explicit part of the gathering. And so people say, gosh, I should know that guy's name. You know, he sits across from me in worship and I just can't, so I'm just going to pretend that I know his name. But if it was an instruction given with the prayer, introduce yourselves around your table and tell one thing that, now I know Thanksgiving, tell one thing you're thankful for. That's so tired and worn out. It's good, but we can be more creative than that. You know, I had you all today share an event that brought you joy and just name it. Don't explain it, just name it. There's so many questions that you could ask in that vein where you tell people, and you know, the potluck doesn't necessarily have an overarching theme, but you're actually connecting people intentionally by giving them instruction to even if they all think they know each other, just tell them, just humor me, just do it. Name, you know, something about them or answer a guiding question. And then that take home question. Those are very simple things you can do that now your event is different than it was before you did those things. So Mike, I hope that's a little bit helpful, but yeah, what are we getting out of this? What are the participants getting out of it? And then how are their lives different from this moment on? And, you know, that sounds like too big of a question, but honestly, if you go home thinking, you know, I never thought before about that thing that person said about how to find tranquility in my life, I'm going to start doing that. But it was someone else at the table who shared that with them. And now their life is different because they're trying that new thing. Anything else anyone wants to share or ask Mike?
Share one more thing. Just last week, I was, our church is a wine club for the last 20 years, which I facilitate. And we were talking about grapevines and a particular kind of grapevine, which really needs rocky, bad soil in order to make the most flavorful grape. And so we had this conversation about the struggle that the vine does to grow. And then the next day, one of the members texted me and said, you know, that got me thinking about God and our purpose on life and how we all have to struggle, just like the grapevine has to struggle. And we all have our struggles in life. And I thought the struggles tore me down, but they should make me stronger because my roots grow deeper. And, you know, and it was, I mean, I wasn't preaching, but this person heard that in that wine club. And it was, I mean, it was really touching, but anyway.
That's great. And they helped each other in that way with thoughts that they hadn't had beforehand. That's really great. We use this principle in our confirmation class of a lot of the principles out of Parker's book. For instance, when we were had our lesson on creation and creation care, we started with the question. We didn't tell them that the lesson was going to be about creation, but we started with the question. We had them all write down on a piece of paper. What's some place that you haven't been that you would love to go? Anywhere in the world or the universe. What's a place you haven't been where you would love to go? They all wrote them down. We put them in a basket. And I would draw it out and I'd read the place. You know, Victoria Falls in Africa. Who put that in here and say more about that? And so we went through all those submissions. And then in our lesson, we kept coming back to that. What if that place got destroyed? What if that place that you've been wanting to go isn't going to survive, you know, the climate crisis? And what does that mean for something beautiful that God has created that we may never get to see? So it tied back in later on, but initially it was just that question. What's a place that you would love to see that you've never been to before? We do this all the time with confirmation. We did the lesson on the Lord's Supper. Our first question was, what's a meal that you remember that was special to you? And they talked about different, all over the board, different meals that were special to them. And then we went into the sanctuary and stood around the table and had our lesson about the Lord's Supper. So getting people engaged, getting their minds thinking on all kinds of different levels. And then, you kind of go deeper and deeper. But it's actually pretty simple once you form that practice and try it out a few times. Anything else? We really almost went to 11:30, huh?
Yeah. Georgia, this is really very, very nice, very well done. I'm really thank you for being willing to lead this and put this together, and grateful to all of you that became interested in that book and came here today as well, and Julie for recording it and for being willing to continue to share that. It's really nice. Really, I'm thankful for the information and for your time on this. And to all of you for being here.
Go in peace.
I very enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you.
Now we
Go
have our
in peace.
gracious ending. Yes, go in peace.
We can't even join hands, so
That's right.
just say, go in
Bless you.
peace. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.